So non-duality, there are not two, and there are not two of you, which means that you cannot look back at yourself and judge yourself in a way that is finding yourself in any way lacking. And we often use something that seems sort of like morality in order to cover over this and let ourselves do this. And when we do this, we're actually avoiding feeling in order to maintain our own beliefs about ourselves. And so it never ceases to amaze me how crazy this is experientially, to listen to the feeling, to try to understand when my concept of me has diverged from the truth of what I really am. And I've realized that if ever I want to really change something in a positive way for the better, that I have to align with inspiration and not be the one who is judging something as being faulty, but inspired, and in that moment truly seeing it as whole and truly seeing it and feeling it as I want it to be. And in fact, this door that I have been filming in front of a lot recently because of the pandemic, I can't film in other parts of the house, is a perfect example. So for years, I failed to paint this door white, which was my plan. I was just going to paint the door white and have it blend in because it's this funny shape storage closet that was just a funny part of the house that, because we had to shore up something and build a wall, ended up being here. And so the door is cut at an angle, and I could not muster the motivation to paint the thing white. And so it looked hideous for a really long time, and I lived with it that way. And it wasn't until last summer that I got the idea. Is like, you know what, instead of painting it white, why don't I do something that I'm actually inspired to do with it? So since it's just a cheap door, I stained it dark and painted some trees on it and got this lion hardware and kind of made it like a Narnia kind of thing. And it's like my favorite thing in the room now, as where before it was this unfinished project that I glanced at and thought was hideous and kind of reminded of the circumstances of it being this funny shaped storage closet. And so now I've turned it into this whole new thing. And that is exactly how we have to go about spirituality. And so often we take morality and we take what we think something should be and take that as the truth and take that as the judge of how we're doing, rather than truly seeing how it feels and realizing that the way that we want to feel was the entire reason for the pursuit of this anyway. And so you cannot get rid of you. When we say there's no you and there's no duality, it's more profound than denying something. And so it's a counterintuitive thing, because it's in those moments of inspiration that we feel full of ourselves and we feel confident. And sometimes you'll even have like a thought of appreciation sort of directed at yourself come in, and then the second thought comes up and it's like, oh, that was pride. And so we judge ourselves as being prideful, was really the first thought wasn't the problem itself. The second thought came in and tried to compare itself to a standard of what it thinks spirituality looks like. There are not two of you, and so you cannot compare yourself. And so often we think that thoughts are the things that we're aware of having as thoughts. And when you pay attention to feeling, you realize that there's no boundary between thought and feeling, and there's no boundaries between thought and feeling and beliefs and resistance, and all these things kind of come into your awareness, and you see this sort of like framework of things and things that are driving you that before you could not be aware of, because you were trying to compare yourself and trying to fit into some standard. And so often we take the most beautiful spiritual teachings and the teachings the teachers that inspire us the most. And when we get away from our center, like I illustrated in the Eye of Suffering video with the color wheel and the various ways that we can suffer, when we get away from ourselves, we take these spiritual concepts and we're beating ourselves over the head with a hammer, practically. And so we take these new things that we've learned and that in our inspired state we've loved, and we sort of accidentally held on to them as some sort of map for getting us ourselves out. And we know we've held on to something when we can take it with us away from source as a concept. So we use this concept that we've sort of projected hope on. So hope can be an incredibly powerful thing, or it can be a problematic thing, like in this circumstance. And so it's this new shiny hammer to hit ourselves over the head with. And we think because it's a new concept that it will help us, but we don't see the action that we're doing as the problem. And so oftentimes we're it's like the Christian morality of trying to transcend the flesh and the sins of the flesh. And when I was Christian, a lot of the things that I would read or say sort of perpetuated this idea that I wanted to disidentify from the body because the body was dirty. And so, of course, Christians have different types of repressions. And so we, as people who think of ourselves and have the self-concept and create two of ourselves to look back upon ourselves, see ourselves as above and more evolved than that. And in a way, like, yeah, okay. But in another way, it's the exact same mechanism of the mind to split things, to try to look back at itself and see itself as lacking. And in order to see yourself as lacking and still have a positive outcome that you're looking for, something that you're trying to do, you have to project that as a possibility for you in the future. And things can get more hopeless than that. Like if you envision on that wheel as you go further out, it can get to the point of suicidal thoughts where it's like, I cannot live with this anymore. I cannot live with myself anymore. And that's like the most extreme example of the self looking back at itself and finding itself as failing. And we can do this at any point, and we can take the spiritual teachings and the knowledge that we've come across and we can sort of like split it at any point. And it's so funny to see how it's all not paying attention to feeling, but really continually believing these thoughts, believing that we truly are a problem that we therefore have to get rid of. Yesterday I went for a walk in the woods, and I had this intuition to go back and look at this tree that my dog was digging under. And as I did, I noticed this little birch tree, and a bigger spruce tree had fallen on it and pinned it, so it was bent right across, kind of like this, severely. And so all these branches were held over it. And I looked at it and I thought about what it would take to free it. And I realized at first it would take a lot of effort of removing the dead, broken tree. But at some point you would want to watch out, because that tree was going to, by itself, spring itself back up as soon as much weight and resistance was taken off it. So in that way, it seems like at first we're doing something, but it's really, this is kind of where the concept of ourselves as the one who's doing things and ourselves as the one who's putting these practices in order and the one who's actually dropping these beliefs kind of falls apart. Because what you're seeking is seeking you. And at some point that tree on its own is going to come back up. And is it going to be perfectly straight? No, some damage is going to be done. It's still going to be flopping over to the side a bit, and it's going to take cycles of sunlight and rain to get it back to its positive state. And so I thought about what a good metaphor that was for letting go of a belief, and how at any point, like as soon as we're free of resistance and we still find ourselves kind of like leaning in this old direction, that we judge ourselves and we're like, I went through this incredible breakthrough. And we can like even look back at our own progress and use it as an example in which we're failing. Like if you've ever had an awakening or been in this like incredibly high conscious state, ooh, states, that's a good way of comparing ourselves to another thing, but let's not get into that right now. And you find yourselves lacking, there's not two. So we cannot compare, and that's why it feels bad when we do, because it's stepping away from the love and the truth that is the deepest identity that really is.